Welcome back to a little bit of a midweek video here. There's a game that I was playing through recently, and I'm gonna totally just mess up the pronunciation, so please bear with me. Called Iblard Laputa no Kaeru Machi. It's just not. I mean, if I can barely even pronounce it, do not know what that means in English. And this is a game that came out in Japan. It's a Japan exclusive PlayStation 1 game. If I've added the footage here and I've done my job, it's very much an artsy type of game that never left the region. And thankfully, there's a really nice fan community online that went ahead and translated it into English, so I was able to patch it and check it out. And this is something that I was playing through, honestly, just for myself, not really even for YouTube, but as I started playing through more and more of it, and I really just loved the experience, I just kind of wanted to do, it was originally just kind of a little bit of maybe like a showcase type of thing, but really just a little bit expanded into my thoughts on this type of game in general, because it's definitely not it's the only one of its kind, these artsier type of games that existed on big consoles, backed by a big publisher. I know nowadays we do have, artsy games through the indie scene and stuff like that. The most recent example I can think of was a game called Subway Midnight, which is not a traditional game. It's more of an, artsier type of game that I was a really big fan of. But back then, I think just the idea of seeing this is on a PlayStation, just needed money to be made. And this is based off of, this guy, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his name. I'll display it here, but he's a surrealist painter. He provided background paintings on one of the Studio Ghibli movies, for example. And he basically even has an OVA that I'm going to check out soon too, if you're interested. But the whole point of this game is that it's based off of his work, these very surrealist fantasy type of experiences that literally one of his paintings is in the game in order to provide clues to a certain type of puzzle. And so what I mean by this type of game, this type of artsy type of experience, is that I'm sure if you're familiar with the PlayStation in general, you might have heard of this game, but really it might call back to certain games such as LSD Dream Simulator, which is another game that isn't strictly okay, this is a, A to B, collect all the things, beat the final boss, traditional type of game. It really is meant to be more experienced as hey, this is it's still a game. There's mechanics and there's puzzles to be solved. It's not, super complicated or complex, but it is still an interactive, type of experience, it's not just an art gallery in video game form. And I think what I meant by overall bigger thoughts on these types of games for me personally is I wanted to just kind of get into why I love them, because there's lots of things that are very dated about this, I think games are so tied to technology, which isn't to say that other industries aren't, obviously you have movies at one point, they were made without sound or without color until technology caught up. The music industry is the same way, we had limits for how many instruments could be recorded at a time, unless you had creative workarounds or till technology caught up. I get it, all industries or whatever are driven by technological advancement and stuff like that, and people get creative in the meantime. But I think games especially, have this they're very tied down to the technology at the time. There's an interview, for example, with one of the Final Fantasy developers that, I'm not that well researched on these videos. I'm going to probably get some of this wrong, but the gist of what he was saying was that, if you look at what I'm displaying for Laputa, right, it has that PlayStation aesthetic, is what they literally call it now almost. It's that low poly, retro, sometimes lo-fi is used, but it's a very particular type of style that people will try to replicate it. And the same even happens for the Nintendo 64. People will call back, especially 3D platformers, to that type of style, even though you have modern sensibilities, hindsight of game design, better tools. For example, the developer for Final Fantasy VII that they interviewed, which I'll try to link down below, was saying that he's kind of surprised that people will go back and try to recreate this type of vibe, because really the developers back then weren't particularly aiming for that. They really wanted to be more detailed or just get more in depth with it, but they were quite literally limited by what they were able to display. So it's almost this kind of confusion to want to go back to a specific type of look that really kind of like dates the game in a sense, And so Laputa is one of those games that does give me that similar type of vibe where it's like I can see through the cracks. There's certain choices in both game design and the way that it looks that very much dates it, but I think also makes it a much more compelling experience. And I wanted to make a case, I think, for like, you should check this out if you're interested in these types of games. It's a very much like, you know how I said this was like someone that did the background paintings for a Ghibli game. It very much nails that type of experience from the get-go. Like the story is very much that like whole isekai, like I've been transported to a fantasy world and now I must navigate my way out of this while also learning a very important life lesson along the way about, never losing the magic. I'm very much simplifying the story obviously here. And, I'm not trying to stereotype it or anything because I really loved it. And it really adds, I think, the technological limits, the way this game looks, the way that this game is limited on the PlayStation, to that type of feeling of being in a different world. You're navigating this fantasy world full of floating islands, and spaceships that can fit into your pocket powered by crystals, fantasy creatures. Sometimes the buildings and the architecture look like very almost like real world, almost Roman or Greek influenced. I'm not cultured, that's just the closest term I could think of. But at the same time, it's full of like creatures speaking a unique languages and witches and stuff like that. So it very much is trying to like create its own spin on things. There's very much like an ancient civilization / like magic and technology are meeting in the middle type of experience going on here. At one point I was navigating like a specific part of the map where you're walking through a town. And while walking through the town, obviously like you'll start to see things like, textures that repeat again, buildings that will start to like very much repeat over and over again. Like it looks like, like a game level, like a game designed level. Because of technological limitations, because of game design, they made this town that has no NPCs where the buildings will repeat often. But this is not only just because of technology, but just to also help the player make sure that like, hey, if you're walking down this part of town with nothing to do in it, it's because you're not really supposed to, like, that's not where the next part of the game is, And so all the unique buildings and stuff like that is where like, the keys to the puzzles will be, or like where the next part of the map will be, which isn't like in a more modern game, like that may not be as on the nose, like the stuff you're not supposed to check out will probably be like a little bit more immersive. But I think it almost adds to it in the unique sense of like I'm not going to use a lot of buzzwords and stuff like that, but it makes things feel a little bit like almost like liminal, like very lived in and almost mysterious in a sense. And this game is really full of like that energy. But at the same time too, like there's all sorts of like really frustrating mechanical things too, where it's like I had to use save states and stuff like that at one point because I got so tired of the tank controls. And like if you fall off, like there's one level where I had to spam save states because I got so tired of falling off of the game map and then being sent to the very beginning of like the stage that at one point I was like, I'm so tired of wasting time here, which is funny because like I'm trying to waste my time here. Like these are games that are meant to be like you're meant to poke around, you're meant to check stuff out. Leaving the world so like with simple polygons, like simple textures, the color palettes and stuff like that they had to use, it weirdly adds to how sucked into the game you are. So like I know I said in a more modern game, like the worlds are likely to be more detailed and not like, as like obvious, like this is where you should go and this is where you shouldn't go. Or they might cram it with like, here's this, congrats on exploring the world. We put a little secret collectible here for you and stuff like that. So you don't get that. You can just absolutely wander down the corridor and completely waste your time. But weirdly enough, that makes the whole point of the game, like the whole like fantasy aesthetic, like a lot more compelling. And it makes it feel like there's this thing I think that if you have been gaming for your whole life, you'd only get if I explain it here, where it's like, you almost feel compelled to like kind of just check out every little nook and cranny. And this is with the knowledge that that you're not going to find anything, but there's this just certain appreciation for being allowed to do that, because it's just an interactive medium. It's like so satisfying that you get allowed to check things out. You like wander down the corridor or like to like a secret like little area or whatever, and it's kind of like cool. Like it's this was made by someone, and it was made by someone for you to actually walk around in. And except this is a little bit more mechanically involved. There are puzzles to solve. Like there's logic here. Like it's you do get to poke around and stuff like that. But quick example is like you encounter like these like heffalump elephants and stuff like that, and so the only way to beat them is with a broom. That's not going to make any sense until you play this, but that tells you when you find these elephants in future levels, like, okay, like I have to go find a broom, to beat them. Or when you find a key hole shaped like a moon in like the early stages, that later on you have to go find the moon key. And so, like I said earlier, the puzzles don't get complicated. It's not that complex of a game, but it does take advantage in that sense, like it's not just one big glorified cutscene, nor is it one big glorified just like I guess art gallery, like it is like it does try to go out of its way to be a game. But I guess besides overall trying to convince you to check this out, I think really the main point of this video was like it's I think something that's a little bit lost to time. Nowadays people chase this aesthetic, people chase this type of game design in order to like call back to these times, because I'm sure even the game designers here, if they were able to use today's technology in hindsight, this game would have come out a lot differently. There were limitations at the time, and it would not be the same immersive game. It wouldn't be as cool if the technology were better. Similar to how, like, there's really classic black and white movies. There's really classic records, from like the 30s and 40s and 50s where technology was more limited. Iblard is one of those games where it's like, it's not like super interesting, like mechanically as a game, I'll be honest, but they really go out of their way to make a world that is helped by these technological limitations. And again, like I can't describe it unless you really, I think, grew up with this kind of stuff. It's not like a modern game where there's achievements and goals and stuff and secrets and stuff like that to poke around, but it really adds to wanting to poke around and see more of each stage. And yeah, there's a little bit of a frustration with the controls and certain puzzles being a little bit frustrating to get through. Just the sound design being so killer, this music being so beautiful, sound effects make it like all the levels feel like you're taking like a nice stroll through like springtime on an alien planet. And just even like the satisfaction of like damn, these are like classic menu sounds. Like it just clicks so well together. And there's a couple of games like this I've seen recommended for the PlayStation where it's like, hey, this isn't really like a traditional game. It's more of like being able to poke around on like old computer games and stuff like that, where everything felt so like, well, what's like this world feels massive. Like it's not literally, not in a literal sense, but it feels like an endless possibility of like options and worlds to explore is out there. And that's how I felt about games growing up as a kid. Like old school PC games and being able to explore bigger worlds compared to like old school like platformers that I grew up with when I was like first starting a game. It really made games feel limitless. And this was a trip to revisit because not only, again, would I not have been able to check this out growing up as a kid because I didn't grow up in Japan, but even now in 2026, like it really transported me to that type of like feeling, of like what's in this world. Like I want to know more about it. I want to poke around. And I think that's what's beautiful about really these types of games in general. I think it makes it cool to look at life in that way, like if you can treat life like in the same way that I treat this game, where it's like you look at the most mundane like things with such like excitement, with such curiosity, like you just are driven to be curious and really explore around. Like this is the feeling that I got from this game, and I think it's a great way to live life, really. I would say give Iblard a check out. It's a very unconventional type of game, but I think if you're like me and you keep a curious mind and you just kind of like are open to like, let's check this out, like I know I said it doesn't feel like an art gallery, but it almost feels like the next level to that. It's its own type of weird, like almost like a Disneyland ride in a sense. And, you know, obviously, like in a Disneyland ride, you're on a roller coaster or whatever, you know, you're not literally seeing like the abominable snowman on the Matterhorn, or you're not literally in space on Space Mountain, but you're able to suspend disbelief enough that you get something really cool out of it. And I think this is what you'll get here. But other than that, I think that's all that I have for this video. I'll let you know my thoughts on like that OVA if I do decide to check it out. And I know, again, like I said, there's a couple of experiences like this on the PlayStation, so I may check out some more stuff like this just to kind of showcase it and let you know my thoughts on it too. But other than that, I'll see you for my usual weekly video at the end of the week. And I'll see if I can get some more, I guess, like midweek content uploaded, because I find this kind of stuff fascinating. And even if it comes off, I think, a little bit more rambly and not as organized as my usual videos, it's fun to talk about and fun to like just discuss. So yeah, appreciate you watching if you did up to this point. Other than that, please, I welcome you to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already. I got my usual book club at the end of the week, but if you got any more recommendations for games like this or stuff that I think you think I would like or should check out, just let me know down below and I will be glad to. Other than that, see you guys.